And I looked at when I was looking at the data points of like, okay, like who lives longer between Italians and Americans? If someone's living longer than us, they must be doing something better than us. And Americans, this hustle culture that we chase so much money, we chase so much shit. And it's like, for what? All right. Buongiorno. Episode 15. After a week off, 3 weeks off for me, technically on a honeymoon, but a week off from the podcast. Glad to be back. Today, I'm obviously going to talk about what you guys assume I would talk about is the Italian lifestyle, right? And being in Europe for 3 weeks and the experience of being on a honeymoon, the experience of obviously taking a vacation that long for myself and just really being engulfed and immersed into the Italian lifestyle. I was like, okay, I think this would be a fun one to do for everyone is like, what are the things that, as a long lifetime American myself that's really never left the country. I left the country once last year for Cancun. That was my first time out of the country. You always hear about this like difference in lifestyle, right? Like how the Europeans live or Italians specifically, and like how the Americans live and what we can learn from each other and blah, 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 blah. So I thought it would be kind of a good episode to kind of go through all that of like, what my experience was. I will talk a little bit about the trip. I want to talk a little bit about like what I think Italians do really well and what I would love to kind of just take and adopt as far as my lifestyle goes. And also what are the things that I think we do better and the things that I don't want to change, right? And then I think overall talking a little bit more of like the importance of vacation, right? Because I think vacations for me is something that I've really changed my mind on over time because over time, it's been something I've realized is just education for life, right? Like it's something that actually you pick up new hobbies, new routines, new styles of living, different perspectives on living, different perspectives on culture and people. So I think it's obviously very empowering in a lot of different ways. So let's start with the vacation first. I mean, overall, 15 nights in Italy for our honeymoon. It was an amazing trip. We did 3 spots. So we did Taormina in Sicily for spot 1 for 6 nights. And then we did Ischia, Forio Ischia, which is a little island above Capri for 6 nights. And then we finished up in Rome for 3. I think the order of how we did our spots was absolutely perfect because originally we're flying into Rome. We're like, oh, maybe we'll just do Rome first and do the touristy thing there because that's what we wanted to do in Rome. And then we'll do kind of like our typical, just like veg out, eat, drink, and lay on a beach or lay by the pool, at the other spots. So we ended up making a last minute change, and I actually think it was perfect because Ischia was definitely kind of like the reset spot for us. So by the time we got to Rome, Rome was something that I was actually excited to like walk around and go see all the, the history that Rome provides because it literally is just like a walking museum, right? Taormina for me though was actually, my wife and I both had the same opinion that like Sicily was probably ranked the lowest for us, just like overall experience. Like I think like the view and the place that we stayed at was my favorite because we had this just like perfect sunrise every single morning. So it was like every morning I would go out, have 1, 2, 3, 4 cups of coffee depending on the day, and I would just like literally stare at the sunrise for an hour, 2 hours sometimes, read a little bit, do the thing. But like you really, as for someone like me that really appreciates being outside in the sun itself, I've always considered myself still a sunset person, but I will say when you are facing east like that, there is something magical about getting up that early just to watch the sunrise, and that's something I've always really just like, when I'm in Hawaii, I feel like it's easier for me just because of the time difference. So like waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning is just like unconsciously happening just because of the time change. Italy was like a little bit of like having the light open or the doors open and having the light come in to kind of wake you up, force me up. But overall, I mean, Taormina, I think the show White Lotus kind of screwed it up for me a little bit, right? Everyone was talking about like there's this White Lotus tax that when they filmed White Lotus, the show, for those that don't know, it's like murder mystery show that got filmed in 4 seasons of Taormina. Everything was super expensive, right? The food, the wine, like everything just felt like, I'm like, wow, this is like way more expensive than I thought it was going to be. I think like everyone for me, when I was talking about Italy and Europe and just what I was seeing on the internet was like, oh, Europe's going to be cheap. You're going to be able to get the street wine. You're going to be able to get this cheap, like little hole in the wall food. Everything's going to be phenomenal. And like, we didn't really have that experience. I thought like everything was very expensive compared to like, I mean, we live in California in the Bay Area. Like for me, I think generally I'm probably price anchored at a pretty high level to begin with. And I had a hard time leaving for under $200 a dinner. Granted, we were doing like the full experience, get the bottle of wine, do the tasting menu, try to get everything that they serve to kind of really be immersed in it. Our best dinner overall on the trip was in Taormina. My best day as far as beach day goes was in Taormina, but overall, I felt like a little dirty, a little overpriced for me, and just like weather, unfortunately, just was not aligned for us. But that's not their fault. That's just the weather. Second part we did was Ischia, and Ischia was like what we were told is like more of like a local vacation spot, right? So like a lot of locals will go there for, like when they take August off and, all the breaks that they take in the European lifestyle, which I'm going to touch on in a second. Ischia was definitely a nice reset. Hotel was amazing. We stayed at Botania, which is like ended up being kind of like a wellness retreat. So they had the sauna, they had the thermal pools, they had the spa. We got a massage a couple times. All the food was from the garden on the property. They had a Michelin star restaurant that was a vegetarian vegan one, which I know my wife is probably going to hate me for saying this, but it was the worst fucking dinner that we had. Most expensive and worst dinner. But it was an experience, as they said. We kept asking at the pool because, like, I'm not someone that really likes not having any type of protein or meat in my dinner. But we did it, and we learned, and we'll never go back there to that restaurant again. But overall, Ischia was just like a great experience. A lot slower, greater reset. Rome was just like the perfect little finish because like Rome, it really goes to show you like how young America is. Like you hear that, but you don't like until you experience it for yourself. Like I'm like, okay, now I understand. Like seeing the Colosseum, seeing the Trevi Fountain, seeing the Piazza Novana, whatever it was called, seeing the Vatican City. Well, there was one more that I really liked. But like just going through the town and walking around like was really kind of just like a cool experience to see like what history actually feels like. And I think the culture and the soul that's left in it, like that's one thing that, one of the talking points of today for me of like America, right? Like I think a lot of times we don't really keep a lot of preservation around landmarks or history sometimes. I think we're always so much on just building new stuff and building and tearing down new things. And I think sometimes you lose a little bit of the soul. And I use that metaphorically, right? Of like the feeling of history, right? I think there's like a really cool feeling that you get just walking around Rome and kind of seeing the things. Like for me, the Colosseum, I probably would say was my favorite. Just because it's so epic and it's so big and it's so old. But overall, great trip. I think the most underwhelming thing for me, surprisingly, when people hear me say this, and both my wife and I agreed, was like the food. Food was good. It's not bad, but like it wasn't like blowing my hat off. It wasn't like amazing. Like I think the food quality is great. I think the frequency of like the amount of restaurants that are there, like you get like a much higher average of better food versus like California. I think a lot of us just forget like how spoiled we are. Like we have so much access to good things, right? Good food, good drinks, good landmarks, beaches. Like we have so much around us. This is why we pay the taxes to live here because like California really just does provide that. So there's like a little bit of like that. I also think I was just telling Chaz this. I think like my expectations sometimes I have a problem of like raising them too high after I hear a lot of good feedback from people. Like, oh yeah, this is gonna be the best. But the food was like it was all right, right? But overall, like what I want to talk about today is like, okay, in my experience for 15 nights, what can we learn from the Europeans, right? What can we learn from the Italians, right? What it was like from a pace of living, right? And I think a lot of us talk about this like slower pace of living that like the Italians have, right? I see this on the internet all the time. I hear this from people all the time. And I will say, like, as far as like your breakfasts or your coffees or your lunches or your dinners, I love how slow they were. It definitely took me it took me a couple of days. Like everyone here is like, okay, it's hard to get your check. Like you really do have to ask for your check if you're trying to get out of there. But this whole like churn and burn style of eating that I think a lot of us have here. Like for me personally, it's just like I sometimes just look at food as fuel and it's like I just need to eat just to get some food in and I need to go back to my work or I need to go back to whatever I was doing. In Italy, that's definitely not the feel, right? Like food itself is just an experience overall. And food itself is also a very social thing, right? Like it was very rare, it would see maybe a few times I would see someone actually eating by themselves. Granted, I know like it's very touristy and just in Italy to begin with. So there's like a lot of people I'm sure that are just like tourists and traveling that were eating together. But even just looking at the locals, like one thing for me that I've always tried to do no matter where I go in life is like, doesn't matter if it's Hawaii or when it was Mexico last year or when it's Italy, just the last couple weeks. I always like to kind of look at the, locals, like how is their style of living? How's their well-being? How's their like state of mind kind of look? Granted, there's a little bit of a language barrier, so I don't really get to fully have conversations and kind of experience it. But like, what is that all from? Even like body language is universal no matter what. And the food for me was always something that was kind of interesting. It was like, okay, it's very communal, right? Like they really take their time. They slow things down. They make it an experience. They make it a social aspect. And even dinner. Like I remember when I was doing show notes last night this morning, I was like looking up, like the things that we think about as longevity experts or the biohackers and what they talk about, or what we talk about the health and fitness space is like, okay, don't eat late. You want to eat when the sun's out because of insulin sensitivity and circadian rhythm alignment. And then you go somewhere like Italy, and it's like you can't even like going to dinner at 7 is like the hell are you doing here so early? Like the restaurant's empty, right? Like restaurants would close down from like 2 to 5. They would open back up at like 7 for the first dinner for like a lot of spots. And they would serve all the way till 11, 12, 1 a.m., depending on the place that you would go to. And then for me, it's like, as far as like health fitness brain goes immediately, I'm like, damn, like I feel like we've been educated, or I've been educated, the stuff I read that you're not supposed to be doing this, right? And I looked at when I was looking at the data points of like, okay, like who lives longer between Italians and Americans, right? And right now the Italians are living like an average of 3 to 4 or 3 to 5 years longer than we are. There's been definitely a pretty significant drop, I would say, since the pandemic for US overall as far as like life expectancy goes. If you look at California versus the rest of America, we're about 2 or 3 years ahead of the rest of the country. So, but that is something like, I want to talk about this obviously in next week's episode as far as like longevity stuff goes. But when I look at that, that's obviously like a marker that I've always viewed as like, okay, from a health perspective, if someone's living longer than us, they must be doing something better than us, right? Like, are they eating better? Are they moving more? Are they happier? Are they avoiding disease and sickness more? Are they having more time outside? Like, what are these variables that play kind of like a role in this, right? But then also, like, what are the things that you would think negatively would have an impact on that as well, right? So for me, the interesting part was like, everyone smoked cigarettes. Almost everyone was drinking, right, at dinner at night, right, or wine during the day, things like that. And it was hard for me sometimes to like really separate, like, is this a local, is this a tourist? But like my point of view. And then everyone's eating really late. But overall, like, I'm like, okay, well, if you look at the data, like, there's obviously something that we're missing. So meaning, like, are we actually trying to major in the minors sometimes, right? Because a lot of times the things that we make a big deal or make a bigger impact on what we think is important for longevity or optimal health, sometimes maybe it's not. Like, what if actually slowing the way you eat down is better for health, right? What if making food more of a communal social thing is actually better for us than the things that we think are negative by eating late or doing whatever they're doing? So that was kind of like a cool little insight for me, right? It's like something you kind of hear and but then like obviously being there, it's like when, you would do meals, it's like, they do, I forget what they're called now already, but like the appetizers, then you had the first course, then you had the second course or the main course, or, a little digestivo, limoncello shots that we would do after, or espresso, or coffee after. It's like, it's a much longer thing, right? Versus like here in America, it's like you sit down and sometimes you just order almost everything. Like if anything, it's in 2 parts, right? Or 3 parts max. It's like apps and drinks. It's your main thing. And it's maybe a dessert if you're doing one, right? Versus there, it was like, oh, you would have 3, 4, 5 parts of a dinner, and it would just be like much smaller servings. There would be a little gap. Like I think for us, the best restaurants that we experienced, we probably had 4 or 5 courses from start to finish, and it would be a very small serving on a plate, and it would be anywhere from 15 to 20 to 30 minutes sometimes, like in between the courses, making your dinner like a minimum of an hour and a half, but like 2.5 to 3 hours sometimes. And like that I really appreciated. That's something I think like as far as what America's lost a little bit is like, when I was a kid, we grew up having dinner at the table. Everyone had dinner at the table together. I remember we used to say, can I please be excused, after we were done eating? And it was like, is your food done? Did you eat your vegetables? But I feel like it's almost like a lost thing. I don't really know as many families personally that eat together around a table, right? Like I feel like it's less popular than it used to be. Not that people don't do it. Obviously people still do it, but I think it's definitely something that I think a lot of us should be bringing back. Or even going to restaurants, right? With your friends and your family and shutting a restaurant down, or like staying there for a couple hours and just making it a much more social, cultural experience together versus just looking at food to just eat to satisfy the need for hunger to then just move on with your day to do your next thing, to go put the kids down or go, finish up your work or go watch the whatever, right? Like, another thing was technology, right? In my experience, I would have expected that no matter what all over the world, that people are just obsessed with their phones. I actually started developing, I don't even know if I told my wife, but like there was like an unconscious thing that if my wife was on her phone, I would try to get off my phone. And we were on our phones a lot just because we were in a place that we'd never been. So me and ChatGPT were best friends of like, okay, where do we go tomorrow? Or where do we go for dinner tonight? And like just looking up places. But you notice more that like, okay, like people are just talking, right? Like they're just shooting the shit, they're smoking cigarettes, they're drinking, they're having fun. But they're not really like on their phones and they're not really in a hurry, right? And they'll like for me, the inside joke between my wife and I was like the only thing the Italians did fast was drive. Everyone's fucking like a race car driver there, driving super fast these small little dinky cars and roads, but everything else is super slow, right? So that was like number one. I think just like overall how we view food, as far as the social aspect, as far as slowing it down, and like what are the health benefits maybe we could take from it? Yeah, maybe being more parasympathetic, maybe slowing down kind of the whole experience, and maybe adding the social connection aspect that maybe a lot of us are missing. That was a big thing. Next one for me was just the amount of movement you do, right? I think it was interesting to kind of look at this, and I'll give you pros and cons. Like, I think from a movement perspective, my overall steps for me, and I will say that I tend to be probably an outlier in this situation for most people that travel. Like, I average 12 to 15,000 steps a day, probably with work, right? Or just over a course of the week, anyways. So I walk a good amount compared to most people, right? And I think a lot of that is just my job, and then obviously just activity overall with exercise. So when I got to Europe, I wasn't necessarily walking more. I got a little uptake in my steps. Like the first day we walked 24,000 steps, but that was the highest day that we had by a lot just because Taormina was just like a lot of climbing, a lot of walking down to the cable car to get up to the city, little things like that. But you realize that like not a lot of people, even though there's obviously plenty of people driving, but like the amount of driving is not anywhere close to what you see here. Silicon Valley, Bay Area is obviously what I'm viewing and comparing this to, but like everyone drives everywhere. Everyone, the scooters, the bikes, like no one walks places. And I say that probably more to share that with people, to you guys listening to this, because my wife and I think, are very similar as far as like our points of view. Like we love, and she's almost better than I am, maybe because she is more sedentary, but like during the weekends or weekdays, we have date night. Like we walk to downtown Campbell, we walk to the prune yard, like obviously us living in Campbell. So we walk a lot to dinners, but like everything you did there was just like walking somewhere, right? And I think, from coming back to the food a little bit, like one of the things that we hear from a health perspective, and like Stan Efferding really talks about this in the vertical diet a lot, like his big priority for all his clients is like, you got to walk 15 to 30 minutes after every meal, right? Like he wants you to move from a digestive perspective, from a blood sugar regulation, and just obviously a little bit of a caloric aspect of taking kind of steps. But I think in America, we look at movement or walking almost as exercise for people. And I do hear this a lot in assessments of like, well, is walking count as my exercise? And I'm like, context. I think if you're not doing anything, sure, we can view that as exercise in the beginning. But for me, I've never looked at walking as something that we should be considering our exercise, right? I think why I look at walking as just like our form of movement. We should just have movement. We should be walking every day. We should be swimming in the ocean if you're living on the water, those kind of things. Like what we realize that like, from an Italian perspective, like people are just on their feet all day long, right? So that for me, I think was like one of those big things that like, that is where we've really kind of grown away from, is like everyone is so dependent on cars, on Ubers, on their electric bikes, on their electric scooters. Silicon Valley, it's like, it's very rare to see people walking around, which is sad. But like, I think from like, trying to take this episode of like, what are the things that we really need to be doing better off here? For me, it's just like making walking a part of the lifestyle, right? Like, don't be afraid to go take a 20-minute walk to lunch or a 45-minute walk to dinner. Don't be afraid to go walk around to go see people or ride the bikes. It just like, I think things that are just low level that should be unconscious, but that activity is such just like a foundation in Italy from what we saw. It's just like everyone does that. Like, yes, people are driving. Yes, people are on their Vespas, but like there's just a lot of people that are just on their feet all day, working all day. So that was another one. Next one, which is going to kind of lead me into what I was just talking about, was work. I think the perspective of work, for me, you hear this a lot of like, oh, like they take their little siestas before dinner, the little naps. Everything's shut down from like 2 to 5 p.m., right? Unless it's like a hotel or an Americanized thing for tourists. Then you hear kind of about like the August, like they take a whole month off during the summer. They take a lot of their summers off. So like their approach to work is very different. But when you looked at it, and like, and I was trying to look up some actual like data on this, is like, okay, what's like a normal work week for an Italian? It kept saying 40 hours. And I'm like, okay, like, well, we say we're 40 hours. Why is their point of view on work so different than ours, right? Now, this is where I think there's kind of pros and cons once again, if you look at this like two sides of the coin. Number one, from a productivity, like obviously just like look at America in general, right? As far as like GDP and what we do, production, innovation, all the good things. Like I think like obviously it's not even a comparison compared to Italy, specifically for today's conversation. But if you think about like their well-being and their work-life balance, like my point of view, I would say like, okay, the Italians are, if they are working the same, maybe they have a different way of approaching work, right? And that's where I think like even the way they eat is probably the same way I would view the way that they work, right? Because like the hotel that we were at for the second spot, we kept like, man, we keep seeing this guy everywhere. He's like, he's worked breakfast. He was working lunch. We saw him for dinner last night. And they would work like 3-4 days, then we wouldn't see him for a couple of days. Like they're obviously still working on and off as far as like how we do, maybe 5 days on, 2 days off. Who knows? But instead of just cranking out 6, 8, 10 hours in a row back to back, they would do maybe the same amount of hours, but they would do like 2-3 hours, couple hour break. Work the lunch for a couple hours, 3 hour break. Work the dinner for 3 hours, go home and rest, right? So I think they would just like have these little micro dosing of work where it's more spread out throughout the day, right? And it was interesting for me to I was thinking about this on the plane ride back of like, what it would be my approach and style of working, right? Like I've always said that I think if I had it like in the dream way, I used to always say I'd rather work 4 days a week for 10 hours and obviously have the rest of those hours off on those 4 days I'm working and the 3 days completely off to just do whatever, right? So I can do whatever chores I need to do and more importantly, just like relax and do the stuff I want to do outside of work. They kind of have a different lifestyle where I think it's like they're working probably a higher frequency of maybe amount of days or the amount of shifts, but they're not working as much back to back, right? And I don't know if it's better or not. I think it's just really something that I thought was an interesting perspective on work. And I think the biggest takeaway that I can have to share for other people is like, I think one of the most important things you can do is figuring out for you and your lifestyle and what you feel is the best alignment for longevity behind work and enjoyment behind work. That's where you kind of go through these like little optimizations behind it. So the work I thought it was like, I was like, oh, this is kind of like their food. Instead of just having a lot at once, they're just doing a little bit all the time, right? But I like the little breaks, right? It kind of breaks it up throughout the day. Like, I remember watching this video probably about a month ago, and this guy was interviewing, I forget what the business was. And he goes, wait, you just like send your workers home for 3-4 hours? He's like, don't you think we get so much more production out of them if you just like gave them an hour break? And it's like this American interviewer. And he goes, yeah, but what's the point of that? He's like, well, you can make more money. He's like, well, we don't need more money, And I just thought, I was like, hey, it's such a fascinating thing that I think America and Americans, this hustle culture that we chase so much money, we chase so much shit, and it's like, for what? It's like, for what? What are we chasing it for? I always remember this kind of like, whatever it's called, a tale, but it's called like this Mexican fisherman story. This American businessman goes down to Mexico for a trip. He wakes up early, family's sleeping in the hotel, and he's out by the water, and he sees this Mexican fisherman come in, right? And he starts talking to the guy. He goes, oh, you catch any fish? And he goes, yeah. And he kind of starts selling him on this dream of like, okay, well, what are you going to do the rest of the day? He was like, well, I'm going to go home or take the kids to school and relax with my wife. And then we'll pick up the kids and we'll cook the fish that we caught for today and kind of just relax by the fire, just like hang out with the family, right? And he goes, well, why don't you get more boats? And he goes, for what? So he's like, well, so you can catch more fish, right? He's like, okay, but for what? And then he goes, well, then you can grow it and you can have like your own cannery here. And then what you could even do then is maybe you can sell it to an American distributor and then you can grow it really, really big. And then he's like, for what? He's like, well, then you can have so much money that you can have time with your family. And it's just like, it was like a full circle moment. I probably butchered the story a little bit where it's like, at the end of the day, like the moral of the work was just to get the time back with your family. And I think about the Mexican fisherman story or like how Italians live. It's like they just have that is integrated into their lifestyle, right? Like we live chasing the weekends. We live chasing this means to an end of just getting money for whatever reason someone's trying to chase money for. And don't get me wrong, like I have a lot of those habits, good or bad, however you want to view them. But I think it's an interesting thing that like the slower pace of life or the point of view on work is just like the entire point of life isn't to enjoy it. And work is not something that you need to just waste years of your life in order to then enjoy it. I think there's ways that we should just be thinking about how do I like just think about enjoying life all the time. Like, who cares if you have dinner and you're out till 11 p.m. on a weekday, right? Like, who cares if you have a drink on a Monday and I'm not supposed to drink on the weekdays? Like, I think we have such strict boundaries. And that was one thing I think just like the Italians and just like that culture overall, like they don't, it's not as much of that, right? People are just like out there living their life. Like the day doesn't matter, right? It's not like, oh, Monday through Friday I'm good and Saturday through Sunday I party. Like how us, like I think most Americans kind of like a naturally gravitated towards living. Versus theirs is like it's a day, right? Like I'm up, I do some work, I hang out, I see some people, I chat, I hang out with my family, and it's like that is something that I feel like I've been growing towards anyways, but like something that I think like just being around it and seeing that was like, okay, this is important for me because like I really don't want to work for a sacrifice and like, growing anything substantially important, I think in life like comes with sacrifice, but not to a place where it sacrifices your relationships and your well-being, right? So food wise was crazy. Movement wise was really interesting. Work was an interesting perspective on that. Now I want to talk a little bit about like the things that I thought were interesting that I didn't really expect or, maybe I would be like, okay, I feel like we do this better. Number one, I don't think Europeans for me, granted, I'm sure there's a lot of them just like, these fucking tourists and Americans, Europeans didn't really seem like the happiest people to me. None of them were rude to us, but we both had the same feeling of like, they just don't like, you think about all this crazy stuff of how good Italy is and how like happy these people are. I was even looking up data on it, and it was just like, there was like even ChatGPT was like, this is a hard thing for you to find actual scoring on. But I was like, what about well-being? Like, is there a survey or a ranking on like the well-being of people? And America was actually ranked higher at one time, and it's been supposedly from this thing. It said that there's been pretty significant drop over the last 5 years since the pandemic and all the stuff I think politically going on. But like overall, I think like the people for what their lifestyle is, like I felt almost like a little too serious for me sometimes. I'm like, okay, just like relax and like have fun. Like even the pace of walking, the pace of driving, I'm like, okay, what are we doing here? It's like, so there's a little things that I felt contradicting to, which is like, okay, this is supposed to be a slower pace of life and like relax and enjoy it a little bit more, right? Versus like looking so serious all the time. And I don't know, that could have just been my little opinion from only being there for 15 nights. But that was one thing that I like realized. Second thing is we ran into a handful of people. They were like, oh, what brings you to Europe? Is it because everything going on in America? And that was just a reminder for me that like we deal with this a lot here. There's plenty of people probably even listening to this that are too engulfed with politics and too engulfed with thinking the world is burning and falling apart. And I'm like, well, I would tell you that from my opinion, California, the world's fine. America's fine. If you choose to only take your information and your opinion based off media and whatever sources you're listening to, yeah, it's going to look like it's a shit show over here. But that was also something I should say for me. It was just like a lot. There was like 2 or 3 people that said that, and I'm like, no, it's like it's fine for me. I think we're having a great time over there. But overall, like I said, I think Europe has its pros, it has its cons. The food for me, everyone talks about the food quality. I would say food quality was probably better, but I don't think food tasting wise. And if you know the spots, and if you're someone that's just cooking a lot at home, I don't think it's anything that you can't get here in California that we like. That was one thing that was actually the most underwhelming for us. I was like, we get good wine, we get good food, we have good coffee. They might have a higher frequency of averages of finding good access to that stuff. Like that's just because of some of the laws that America is pretty bad about. That a lot of things that in the food products, and I say food products here, are illegal in Italy. So those are like a lot of little regulations that I think that we could be better on. But overall, I just think like the style of living is something like there's a lot of things that we could be adopting from it. But I will say overall, just being gone for those weeks, that as always, was excited to be home. A lot of people on the internet, when I see things of travelers, like, oh, I just can't wait to be back in Europe and I miss the lifestyle. I think a lot of people, and I said this in my work-life balance episode a couple weeks ago, they don't really optimize themselves here, right? So instead of complaining that like Europe is better than America, I think it's like, what are the things that we can do to change our lifestyles here to make our experience the greatest, right? Because me and Nikki were talking about that. Like if we had a tourist coming from out of country, if we had an Italian come here, the way that I would treat them, I would hope would actually like how we had service at the hotel was amazing. How we had service everywhere else was average. And for me, I think about like with my business is like I would want someone to have such a good experience. I would want someone to have such a good opinion of America or of California, of Mountain View, Palo Alto, Campbell, the places that I live and work. Like for me, like having pride in that versus a competitive outlook on that is important to me, right? So like I'm very prideful of where I live, right? I'm very prideful of my country, my state, my city. Um, and I think Italians have a lot of pride, which I think is like something I'd appreciate, but it's almost like they kind of shun all you fucking Americans. Like there's moments where I felt like that. I'm like, I would never want to make an Italian feel that way when they're here. So, but that's just my perspective and outlook on that. So I know it's a little bit of a rambling on. I hope it provides some level of value. I just want to kind of share a little bit of my opinion and vacation stories and honeymoon on it. And I will see you guys next week. Next week's episode is going to be longevity versus vitality. So stay tuned.